Exactly 1 year ago I started making a prototype model of the Pokemon Mimikyu, and then life happened and I didn't finish it, until now. If you haven't seen part 1, there'll be a link to it somewhere below, or on screen when I work out how. To recap, this model is made almost entirely out of Super Sculpey medium firm, with only small pieces of aluminium wire and glue to hold it all together. I massively underestimated how simple this sculpt would be to make with my current skills, and as usual it took way longer than anticipated. If we boil down the basic shapes of the character, he's a squashed oval over a conical body with some coney ears and a multi-triangled skirt. This isn't too complex really, but the difficult part is smoothing out all of the contours so it looks nice and uniform. I've done this by laying down lots of long, thin clay sausages around the joints and blending them with a metal tool. It's wonderfully effective and has become one of my favourite techniques. You can see it especially at the base of the ears, neck, and above the triangular hem. There's a little bit of leeway in how perfect Mimikyu should look, as by design he's quite dishevelled, but I wanted to achieve a more professional finish compared to my other sculpts. So after baking him I spent a long time sanding down the surfaces with an emery board. You can see evidence of this in the little discoloured grazes on his face. Despite being covered in cling film for a lot of his life, a lot of dust had made it into the clay. This is because I'm often a slow sculptor and dust accumulates in my room. So I made an effort to blend and smooth everything out with isopropyl alcohol. The higher the alcohol content the better, as it melts the clay down more aggressively. It worked reasonably well to remove the dust and fingerprints, even if it did take a few passes, and after baking and sanding I applied some light coats of primer. In my experience this isn't entirely necessary when working with Sculpey, as most of my other models held paint just fine on their own, but it's useful to get into good habits. As usual, I'm using a small selection of golden acrylic paints mixed into various shades. I find that I end up mixing far more than I actually need for each piece, because I'd rather have too much than too little, and colour matching different batches at a later date seems like a recipe in frustration. In case anyone is curious, the colours I used in particular are carbon black and titanium white for the eyes, ears and undergarments, yellow ochre and burnt sienna for the tail, and iridescent pearl, Hansa yellow opaque and yellow ochre for the body. They've all been balanced with a few drops of white or black depending on how far off target I was. I wouldn't say that these are exact colour matches, as most Pokemon have colour discrepancies between different media, but they're close enough for my purposes. The yellow body was one of the most challenging parts to paint. I couldn't decide on a good direction for my brush to follow, and the coverage was fairly transparent. I may have mixed the paint too thickly to get a good seamless consistency across multiple coats, which wasn't a big deal in the end, but something I'll learn from in future. After multiple coats, it was time to do the details. This was a daunting task and took some nerve to do. I penciled them all in first to use as a guide, and then with a very fine brush, carefully drew the eyes. Luckily, wet paint is a bit forgiving on this kind of surface, and small errors could be corrected with my thumb. In the story, Mimikyu DIYs his outfit using marker pens to draw his eyes, mouth, and cheeks, so I decided to do the same with some fine line Sharpies. This was way easier and far more accurate than dealing with a brush. At this point, it was getting late and my hands were quite shaky, but luckily it worked to my advantage in replicating his wonky style. Overall, I'm very pleased with how he turned out. He looks pretty authentic to his original design and the brush marks aren't too obvious from a distance. Having said that, I'd love to get my hands on an airbrush eventually to achieve a more consistent surface, but they have their own set of rules to follow and I can't imagine I'd enjoy masking out shapes with tape. With the exception of a matte varnish to dull his shine, which I didn't have on hand during filming, he's definitely done and I'm quite pleased with the result. So far, he's my most intricate sculpture yet, and it's been a great way to practice cartoon likeness. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.